Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kilowatt, a podcast about electric vehicles, renewable energy, autonomous driving, and much, much more. My name is Bodhi, and I am your host. And yes, this episode is late. So I am on vacation in San Diego. We are visiting friends and family, and it's just been very busy. As a matter of fact, on Wednesday, I woke up at 5 a.m. to write this show, and I thought I would be able to record it earlier, and I just have not been able to because, we're on vacation. We have friends with us. And like I said, we're going to be visiting family tomorrow. I'm trying very hard not to take time away from my family and friends to do this. So it's kind of that delicate balance because I don't want to ignore anybody, but I also want to make sure I can get this show out. So there will be two shows. Today's show is going to be all about RoboTaxi. I actually started the show document thinking, okay, I'm going to talk about GM and the Equinox and all this stuff. But the more I got into the RoboTaxi stuff, I wrote 5 pages of notes. And my pages are bullet points, so it's not really 5 pages. But for me, it was 5 pages of notes just on RoboTaxi. And a typical show is 3 to 4 pages of notes. So we will have a second show. That show will include all of the news that I didn't put into this episode. And the next week should be fairly normal. Hopefully. All fingers crossed. But before we get into our show, we need to thank our patrons who brought you this episode. So this episode was brought to you by Fallen NC, Brad W., Patrick 44, Steve K, and then Charles T, and the last initial is S, because we have a few Charles who support the show. If your name is Charles, or anything else for that matter, and would like to support the show, go to supportkilowatt.com, and there are different ways to support the show on that page. All right, let's jump into our main topic, which, like I said, is a RoboTaxi. So this was all kind of spurred off this week because a video that was posted to X showed a Model Y driving in Austin, had the fancy RoboTaxi text on the side of the vehicle, and the text looks very similar to the Cybertruck font or the Cybercab font, a lot of slanty, cyberpunk style text. Anyway, the video shows a Cybertruck traveling through a busy intersection. There's lots of people around and making a left turn. This isn't super significant, except for there's no driver in the driver's seat. There's nobody in the car at all. So does this mean that RoboTaxi is officially launched in Austin? No, it does not mean that. So this episode, what I thought we would do is we would talk about all of the things that we know about RoboTaxi, things that Tesla and Elon have said. And then we'll talk a little bit about some rumors that I think are credible. And then I'll give you my analysis. So when it's something that Elon or Tesla said, I'll let you know. When it's my own analysis, I'll let you know. And if it's rumor, I'll let you know. All right. Not a lot of rumors in this one, actually. So mostly things that have been directly called out by Elon or, just me blabbing on the internet here. So the first thing is the RoboTaxi service, the self-driving component of it will be camera-based, which is what Tesla calls Tesla Vision. So there's no LiDAR, ultrasonic sensors, or radar that RoboTaxi is using. And this is not surprising. Elon said on X that the Model Ys they're going to use initially are unmodified Model Ys that came straight from the factory. To me, straight from the factory means AI 4 or hardware 4. Now, we all know that Elon works in gray areas, and that's being really charitable. But he has these, he's been known to cook the books a little bit in terms of showing off the technology. It's not always as it seems. I don't know, a number of years ago, like 2018, there was a video of a Tesla self-driving itself from and I think it was an engineer's house all the way to the Fremont factory. And it turns out years later that that video had been doctored and was not exactly as it appeared. And people were very impressed with the video at the time. And in reality, it wasn't real. So when Elon says that these are unmodified Model Ys, we can assume that they have AI 4 hardware in them, right? But there is a world, because Tesla is currently working on AI 5 or hardware 5. There is a world where these unmodified Teslas have the updated hardware in them and they're hardware 5. Now, do I think that that's the case? No, I don't. Has Tesla confirmed that? No, they have not confirmed which hardware they're using. But there is always a small possibility, and I'm talking a minuscule possibility, that they're using the next generation hardware in these Teslas as far as the camera system goes and the computer that runs it. The reason why I think this is a very small chance and not a much bigger chance of this happening is typically whenever Tesla comes out with a new hardware version, a lot of the features kind of get pared down. So if you had a AI 3 or hardware 3 vehicle and somebody buys a hardware 4 vehicle that just came out, right? Tesla limits the capabilities on that hardware 4 vehicle for a time, and the hardware 3 vehicle can actually do more things, but eventually the hardware 4 vehicle catches up. And that's been pretty consistent throughout as they update from generation to generation. So I don't think they're using hardware 5 because it would take a lot of time, resources, and money that maybe they have plenty of money, but maybe they don't have the time and the resources to spend on making hardware 5 work for 10 vehicles. But also because Elon has said that as soon as this, works and they get approval in these different states, or if that provision in the bill that's going through the Senate right now, where there's a AI framework for every state, it's a federal framework. If that was to go through, Elon is basically like, well, we could just turn this on and you could add your car to the RoboTaxi network. We already know that hardware 3 or AI 3 is really struggling with the current generation of full self-driving, and AI 4 is on a lot of vehicles. It would basically be an admission that they don't think that hardware 4 or AI 4 is capable of full self-driving. So I think they have to use AI 4 for all of those reasons, and probably some more that I'm not even thinking about. There is one difference, though, in the cars that are coming off the factory line to be RoboTaxis versus the cars that you or I can purchase, as far as right now goes, is these cars are coming equipped with unsupervised full self-driving. Whereas if we were going to pay the money for the full self-driving package, it is a supervised version. So the vehicles are getting the updated unsupervised version of full self-driving. Now, if you're curious about what other autonomous taxi services are doing, they are using a combination of cameras, LiDAR, ultrasonic sensors, and radar-based systems. So a combination of all of those, some of those, it just kind of depends on which company you're talking about. Now, there's a really cool website. I think it's Drive Austin or something like that. I'll put a link in the show notes, but it will show you all of the autonomous services that are operating in Austin right now. So I'm going to kind of give you a breakdown of who's there and what stage or what phase they're in. So right now, we have the mapping phase, and Motional, which is a Hyundai company, they're in the mapping phase. And then it goes to the testing phase. And right now there are 4 companies testing in Austin. That is ADMT, which is Volkswagen, AV Ride, of course, Tesla, and Zoox, which is an Amazon company. And then we have one company in the deployment phase, which is Waymo. This website is actually really interesting because it gives you all of the information that you would want to know kind of as a lay person. It gives you information about all of the autonomous services or autonomous companies that are operating in your area. And this particular website, it goes through and tells you how autonomous vehicles are defined, how legislation is set up. Um, it gives documented incidents. There's some frequently asked questions about, what's an autonomous vehicle? Who regulates them? What do I do if I witness an incident involving an autonomous vehicle? Again, it goes through the known operators in Texas. And then under the known operators, it gives you a way to contact each company. But it also, on some of the companies like Waymo, you can contact writer support. You can file a complaint. Under Zoox, you can submit a media inquiry. And I'm sure as these companies kind of come out of the testing phase, we'll start seeing, different ways if you wanted to file an incident on Tesla or Motional or whatever, you would be able to do that. It's a good website and worth checking out if you're interested in this kind of thing. So back to RoboTaxi. The initial launch will be a limited fleet between 10 and 20 vehicles. We're probably thinking more on the 10 side initially. And these vehicles will be geofenced. We didn't know that for sure in the past, but we definitely know it now. These are going to be geofenced. And my guess is we don't know where exactly they'll be operating, but my guess is they'll be operating somewhere near the factory. And we'll get into that as to why I think that's going to be the case in a moment. But Elon has said that the robotaxis would be programmed to navigate intersections that it can safely handle and avoid those that it can't. And we also know that they're going to be operating in areas where it's not going to be super challenging for the vehicles. Like they're not going to operate in super congested areas with a lot of pedestrian traffic and other vehicles. But based on the robotaxis being programmed to navigate intersections that it can safely do and avoid those that it can't, based on my experience riding in a Waymo, Waymos do something very similar to this, or it feels like they do something very similar to this. But this isn't exactly what Elon has said in the past when it comes to the capabilities of unsupervised full self-driving. But again, they're starting off with safety in mind. So, we got to give them, even though Elon has made very bold claims about in the last year, especially about unsupervised full self-driving, we got to give them a little bit of a grace period to kind of navigate this stuff and do it safely, because nothing loses consumer confidence faster than you killing somebody early on in your process. And, ultimately, we just kind of hope that nobody gets hurt or there's no accidents. Anyway, I didn't mean for this to get so dark, so we're gonna kind of move on here. I'm only telling you all this because in a CNBC interview, Elon said that he expects to have hundreds of thousands of self-driving cars in its fleet by next year. And this is as the service expands to different cities, and eventually he wants millions of self-driving cars in the fleet. And this only happens if they gain the ability to turn your and my vehicles, Teslas, into robotaxis. Like we can add them to the robotaxi network. Now, I would imagine that cars with AI 4 or hardware 4 will be the ones that are added to the network. And folks like me who have the AI 3 or hardware 3 cars, we're not going to be able to add our cars to the network. But Elon remains confident that he'll be able to do this. He is so confident that he'll be able to do this in the time frame that he has set up in a year for hundreds of thousands of cars, that he has said publicly about unsupervised full self-driving and robotaxi that he believes that this will make other automakers turn to Tesla for their autonomous driving needs because it's going to be so successful. They will have no choice but to do this. Now, in some of the articles that I read, the headline says Elon says that other automakers or third party automakers would be forced to license autonomous driving from Tesla. I don't think that's the case. I also don't think it's the case that unsupervised full self driving is going to make many automakers want to license the technology from Tesla. Like we just went through, Volkswagen's got their autonomous driving service that they're testing. Hyundai, Mercedes, on some roads, you can do level 3 autonomy, which means that, you can look at your phone or watch a movie, but you have to be ready to take over the vehicle. In certain circumstances, the conditions have to be right for you to be able to do that. Ford, I'm not quite sure where Ford is. It seemed like Ford was doing really well on their autonomous driving stuff, but it seems like maybe that's stalled a little bit. But GM is working through Super Cruise, and they have people committed to that. So for third-party automakers to go to Tesla to license unsupervised full self-driving, unsupervised full self-driving would have to do exactly what Elon says it's going to do, and nothing less, nothing short of that. And B, I think a lot of companies would think twice about hitching their wagon to Tesla and Elon specifically, because no matter where your politics are, we can all agree that Elon says what he wants to say. He does what he wants to do, and very rarely does he kind of walk that stuff back. So if GM, for instance, licenses full self-driving technology from Tesla and they pay them a bunch of money, and Elon says something and people are like, well, I'm not buying GM cars anymore. GM doesn't want that. GM has worked very hard at staying neutral. Ford has worked pretty hard at staying neutral. Jim Farley, the Ford CEO, did have a few things to say about the tariffs and how they would raise prices, whereas Mary Barra from GM was a little bit more political about how she addressed those tariffs in the last earnings call. But the point of this is these companies would have to want to tie their brand, at least in part, to Elon. And I don't know that they're willing to do that. They were willing to do that on the North America charging standard, but I would argue that Tesla opened that charging standard up, and the Society of Automotive Engineers actually turned it into an official standard from that body. So I think automakers were probably a little bit more open to doing that. I think for them to license full self-driving and put a bunch of money and technology into these cars and to tie themselves to Elon's whims, I think that would be, I don't think that would be something these automakers would like to do right now. Maybe in a year or two when things cool off, sure, that might be a possibility. But right now, I think they would looking at what happened to Tesla in the last, let's say, 6 months, they would be less likely to take that risk. All right, let's get back on track here. We know that these vehicles are going to be monitored by humans remotely, right? But we don't know under what circumstances the operators will intervene. We don't know what the latency will be between the vehicle and where the remote operator is. Like based on the internet connection, how much time is delayed when something happens in the car and the operator needs to take control. And then there's also latency between the operator realizing that there's a problem that needs to be addressed and addressing that problem. So that we have the internet latency along with the individual person. Like if somebody was super tired, for instance, what would be their reaction time versus when they were completely awake and not tired? So that kind of thing. In terms of the internet latency between the car and where the remote operator is, Missy Cummings, who's the director of Mason Autonomy and Robotics Center at George Mason University, according to Cummings, the communication latency between the remote human operator and the car, that needs to be less than 10 milliseconds. I don't know why I said that's a word. Milliseconds. milliseconds. Anyway, Cummings said that teleoperations can't currently achieve this. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not an expert in teleoperations, but that seems very fast. It seems like something that maybe you could achieve for a few minutes at a time if somebody was stationary, but driving around, that might be difficult because you're going to have variable latency, I would imagine, based on where you are. But we'll see, and I'm sure Missy Cummings is very knowledgeable on this subject, much more knowledgeable than I would be. But, not everybody knows everything. So maybe Tesla will be able to achieve this without having that fast of a connection or that little latency. I will say in the video that we started this whole show off with, where the driverless Model Y was making the turn through the intersection, very close behind that vehicle was another Model Y. And we don't know if the people in the chase vehicle were actually operating or controlling the Model Y that didn't have a driver, or if they were just there just in case. We don't know that information at the moment. And we don't know when Tesla finally launches these robotaxis for a period of time, are they going to have a chase vehicle sitting behind them? We just don't know. A few episodes ago, we talked about Bloomberg reporting that June 12th will be the launch date for RoboTaxi. Well, today's Friday the 13th, June 13th. That obviously is not going to happen. But Elon did post on X that the tentative date for launching would be June 22nd. And the first car to self-drive itself from the factory to a customer's home, Elon said, would happen on June 28th. And this is when I said that I thought the geofenced area would be somewhere around the factory because, if Tesla's operating in this geofenced area, their vehicles can't go outside of the geofenced area. So June 28th is pretty soon. So it makes me wonder if they don't have somebody that has maybe a employee who has bought a car and they are going to do the self-driving thing from the factory to the person's house. By the way, I don't think many people want this unless you live next to a factory. I live in Arizona. I don't know how far away from Arizona Fremont is, but that's more miles that I want on my brand new car than what I would be okay with. It came from a delivery center. There's about 2 miles between a delivery center and my house, but I don't want the car driving all the way from the factory. There's too many variables that can go wrong. And on top of that, I'm getting a car with hundreds of miles on it before I even get to drive it. I'm not interested in that. Unless you give me a huge discount, then I'll be interested in it. Okay, so we talked about launch dates, June 22nd. Elon did say that June 22nd was tentative, and I think I talked about this, but they want to make sure that the launch is as safe as possible, right? They want to safety is paramount for Tesla in the RoboTaxi launch. So if they can't do it safely, then that date will move. And I think that's okay. I don't think we should beat Tesla up because they missed that date. We still don't know what times the vehicle will be able to operate. Are they going to be able to operate 24/7, or are they going to have a set time limit that the vehicles can only operate between 8 and 5, or maybe 10 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the morning, 10 p.m. and 5 p.m. or 5 a.m. in the morning? Like Cruise kind of had this, and I don't know if this was imposed by the state of Arizona, but where I lived, if you wanted to take a Cruise vehicle, you had to wait until like 10 o'clock, and it was like from 10 to 6 or something like that. And I'm in bed by 9, and I never actually took one of these vehicles anywhere. Even though I did, one of the people that worked at Cruise was very nice and did give me access to it. I never utilized it because it was too late at night. Like I didn't want to be out that late because I'm old. We also don't know what's going to happen during like inclement weather, and we don't know how much each ride is going to cost. Elon has talked about, and I don't remember what the numbers are off the top of my head, how cheap it will be to ride in a robotaxi. But I argued at that time that those numbers were so little that the numbers that Elon was throwing out was so little, there wasn't much room for profit. So if you, as a third party, are putting your Tesla on the RoboTaxi network and Tesla is taking a cut out of it, the numbers that Elon was putting out there, I should do this. I'm just going to say for me, that was not enough money to put miles on my car, because you have to replace tires, you have to deal with damage, which you would hope that Tesla would cover some of that damage, but you have to charge your vehicle up and all that other stuff. It just didn't make a lot of financial sense if I was going to put my car on the RoboTaxi network. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like the financial trade-off with the depreciation of the car and putting new tires on it and dealing with, vomit or whatever else people do in the car it wasn't worth it. It wouldn't be worth it to me. And to add to that, Elon has said in the past that the value of your vehicle is going to go up. It'll actually appreciate instead of depreciate. I don't believe that that's true. I just don't see it. So I also wouldn't want to put my car on the RoboTaxi network in hopes that it would increase in value, because it wouldn't. It would make a little bit of money, not enough for me to want to deal with all of the other stuff that I would have to deal with to put that car on the network. So as we get closer to the launch date, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration still has some questions about the Austin rollout, like where are these vehicles going to be operating? What safety features will the cars have? What is the timeline for expansion? And how has Tesla prepared for accidents and emergency scenarios? Tesla's response to the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration is due next week. So if we get more information on that, I will definitely pass that along to you. Oh, yeah. And speaking of transparency, it's unclear how transparent Tesla is going to have to be or is willing to be when it comes to crash data, and other types of things that are involving full self-driving, unsupervised full self-driving. Because at the moment, they haven't been super transparent about the crash data. Tesla is asking the city of Austin, for instance, not to disclose information about the RoboTaxi trial. And when I say trial, I mean the testing, not an actual legal trial, but just like testing. But back to the point, Reuters is actually trying to get this information from the city of Austin. And the city of Austin is considering it. But the cities, from what I understand of Texas, is they don't actually control how, or they don't actually have a lot of say in how these robotaxi networks operate. That is more, that sits more with the state. And so from what I've read and how I understand this, and I could be wrong, is the city of Austin has kind of pushed this up to the state level, the state of Texas level, to kind of deal with whether that information gets released or not. So, and I think that's fair. But Tesla doesn't want this information released because they said that this information would reveal their deployment procedure, the process, their status, and their strategy, which would be, it would cause harm to Tesla. Whether that's the case, I don't know. Probably not. Tesla seems to use the it'll cause harm as a shield, as a way of not to release information, because this isn't related to RoboTaxi, but it is related to the transparency part of this. The Washington Post is trying to get access to information on Tesla crashes involving autopilot and full self-driving, and they're requesting this from the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration because they track it. But there is it's not a loophole, but there is a confidentiality or confidential policy that Tesla is really good at using. So they use this policy to have a lot of, or some data redacted. I don't want to say a lot, but Tesla says that if this data was made public, then its competitors would be able to see what version of full self-driving was on the vehicle when it crashed. They could see data about the hardware system, AI3, AI4, whatever it happens to be. And then they could use this data to improve their own system. So a third-party company could use this data to make their systems better. The Washington Post argues that drivers and owners of these vehicles already know what version of full self-driving or autopilot they're using. They already know what hardware came with the vehicle, or people savvy enough to care about this kind of thing would already know about it. So the Washington Post says, well, Tesla doesn't need to keep that information confidential because it's not confidential anyway. It's just out there for anybody to see. I feel really confident in saying that Tesla's competitors in this space have purchased several different Tesla vehicles in efforts to not only test what the vehicles are capable of, what they can and can't do, but I also feel really confident that they've stuck some of these vehicles in a clean room and done their best to reverse engineer what Tesla is doing at a minimum, right? If I owned an autonomous driving company, I would absolutely want to at least understand what Tesla is doing behind the scenes. But these companies also have a different way of doing things. They are using LiDAR, radar, ultrasonic sensors, and cameras, or some combination of each, to make their full self-driving efforts come true, right? And maybe the way Tesla's doing it is the right way. Maybe it's not. I think we should have many different approaches to solve this problem. And I don't know that knowing what version of full self-driving somebody had would harm Tesla in a competitor way. Now, if we say there's 100 crashes in the month of July, and every one of these crashes had this one particular version of full self-driving, I think that would harm Tesla in a litigation way, but I don't think it's going to harm them by their competitors. It's going to harm them from their customers because there's definitely a trend if there's 100 vehicles, and I'm not saying there are. This is fictitious, but there's definitely a trend. And then going back to, these companies are going to figure out what Tesla's doing, and they're going to be able to get a competitive advantage because they now all of a sudden they know what version of software Tesla's using. That's not the case. But a lot of the engineers that work for these companies, I again feel confident in saying they also worked for Tesla at one point in time, just because autonomous driving is still fairly new. It's not so new that we have to reinvent the wheel with every company. We're building upon things, but these are smart engineers. If they weren't, um, if they didn't specifically work for Tesla, then they probably worked with somebody or trained under somebody in school that worked for Tesla. Like, I can't imagine the community is that big that the autonomous driving engineers, I don't even know if that's what they're called, but people who work in the space of autonomous driving haven't encountered somebody that worked at Tesla or Waymo or whatever. So I think there's a real public benefit to knowing this information for us. Admittedly, it's not a benefit for Tesla, but when you are testing on public roads, and we're not asking to be part of your test, and when I say we, the public, the pedestrians, or the other people in the cars next to these autonomous vehicles, I do think these companies, not specifically just Tesla, but these companies have a right, not a right, they have a duty to be transparent. And is it going to inconvenience this company? Absolutely. But if they get it right, they get to reap the rewards. If they get it wrong, that potentially has serious consequences for us as the public, up to and including death. If an autonomous driving company, and I'm not using any specific company in this example, but if an autonomous driving company has to kill 5 people or seriously injure another 10 people, kill 5 people and seriously injure 10 people before they get it right, and they get to make billions, but they've changed a family's life or somebody's life remarkably, up to, like I said, including death, I you don't get to have the benefit, in my opinion, you don't get to have the benefit of all of those riches and the stock value and all that other stuff that comes with it. You know what? I'm very close to ranting here because I'm getting worked up. I think everybody knows what I'm saying. If you are going to risk the public's lives in your testing, and maybe nobody ever gets hurt, and that's great. But there is always a potential when you put a vehicle on the road that somebody's going to die or get seriously injured. Your data should be as transparent as humanly possible. Do they need to make their code available to anybody and everybody who wants to look at it? No. But is there a situation where they need to make their code, they should make their code available to experts to audit? Yes. Should they make every single accident reportable, and so that we could see it? Absolutely. Absolutely. It could be that my autonomous company that I've built, my autonomous taxi company, RoboTaxi, maybe, just maybe, I have 500 minor fender benders that all cost under $1,000, and I have 3 deaths. All of that should be taken into consideration, and all of that should be viewable by the public. So, yeah, that's it. That's the whole show. I could really rant for longer, but I feel myself, getting, verbose, and I probably shouldn't do that, just because I might get myself in trouble. So I will say, first, thank you very much for listening. Second, thank you very much for being patient because I did miss Tuesday's episode. We will make that episode up to you. I'm hoping on Sunday, but I'm traveling on Sunday, so I don't know. Third, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please send me an email. It's Bodie, BODIE, at 918digital.com. And tell me what you thought, what you're feeling when it comes to autonomous driving, all this other stuff. So I do have one other thing that I wanted to add on this, and I forgot. I wrote it down in the notes, but I forgot to mention it. Jim emailed in, and we were talking about autonomous driving and regulations. And his suggestion was to have a body of experts that the government can lean on, much like, well, we used to have this for vaccines, but much like we have in the Department of Health, where a bunch of experts get together and they say, you know what, this is the best practice. Notice I didn't say this isn't the right way to do things. It's the best practice with the information that we know right now. I think it would be important, and I think Jim makes a really good point on this, is we should have a group of experts that come from different parts of the industries advising Congress on, and other lawmakers, local lawmakers as well, on the best practices for autonomous driving. I personally, I'm not speaking for Jim here, but I personally think that letting the companies do it, one, they're going to pull the ladder up behind them, and they're going to make it very difficult for other autonomous taxi companies to come in and kind of break in. That's what I think they're going to do. Two, I think they're going to tilt the scales to them specifically and make sure that they succeed, even if we as the public, like I said before, don't. All right, stopping here. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you soon.